Hello and welcome to the Humble Ego podcast, a space where I hope we can have truthful conversations about the good, hard and uncomfortable parts of being a creative. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joy, and through having conversations with the creators I admire, I really just wanted to learn and break down how we can stay true to our authentic selves whilst putting our work out into the world. I'm really excited for this episode, and I know I say that like before every episode, but I've been thinking about it so much because I have not only a friend, but an amazing sexologist, art therapist with a background in psychotherapy. I just love this woman for how she can create a safe space for just those taboo conversations that really need to be had, I believe. So we have Edie Bartley.
Thank you. Thanks
Welcome.
for having me on the green couch.
I know, we kind of matched as well. If you guys are watching, we're wearing green as well. I don't know if this is green, but
It's tonal.
yeah. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm really well. I'm a bit tired because I
Yeah.
was kept up by a cat, which you know the
Yeah.
story. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Excited to have some chats about some spicy topics.
I know, this is actually an exciting episode because we're going to dive into you and your story and have some conversations, but we also have a bunch of questions from the viewers, which is the first time I've done a Q&A in a podcast. But I thought that this would be a great way to kind of just like answer some of you guys' questions, because I feel like everyone's just so curious about sex, and unfortunately even in today's world it is still taboo and like so hard for people to talk about it. So we have a little expert in the studio today.
I definitely wouldn't call myself an expert, but I think it's a great way for people to have their questions answered in a really non-confrontational way, instead of like DMing one of us on Instagram or like, you know, booking in for a session. Like that kind of thing can be really daunting. So just like being
100%.
able to listen to a podcast at home in like, you know, their own little comfort space.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah. So I always love to start my podcasts with just like, tell me about you, tell me about your story, how you got to where you are, like what led you to what you do today, and just, yeah, it's very broad, but I just want to know about you because I don't think I know enough. Like we've been friends for a while, but still I'm like, tell me.
Yeah. I guess like on a professional level, it's kind of a random story, but I was living in Melbourne and I was enrolled in textile and fashion. So I was going to go down a completely different path. And then I came back up home to Byron to just like take a year off and relax. And I ended up walking into an open day for psychotherapy, for art psychotherapy, and enrolling in a bachelor's degree. And then, yeah, a few years later, I was in the degree doing my thesis on menstrual shame. And that just took me down a rabbit hole of, yeah, just menstruation and sexuality and shame and gender and so many topics that I realized I was so interested in. And yeah, it kind of inspired me to enroll in sexology, which was super random. Everyone was like, what are you doing? Like, that's really, my mum was like, are you going to get, you know, work? Like, what is that? And a few people that I studied with were like, we were all, you know, keeping track of each other and finding out what each other were doing. And they'd all gone into like various different workforces, and I was just there like studying sexology. And at the time as well, it's still such an emerging like platform, and people don't even really know what it is. And I still get asked like, what is sexology?
Like, what do you do? Yeah.
And like, what does it entail? So yeah, that's kind of how I got to the sexology space. And then I still infuse the art therapy work into that and the psychotherapy stuff.
So amazing. And like for my audience that doesn't really know and have that question, like what do you think you do as a sexologist? I mean, I know it's so broad and there's different areas and stuff, but what does your particular job entail?
Yeah, so the way that I work is I think it kind of happened naturally, but you know, I attract people who I guess see me as like I'm a woman in my 20s, and I guess those are also like, that's the demographic that's kind of drawn to working with me. But I obviously welcome anyone that wants to book in for a session. So I end up working with a lot of like young females who are kind of navigating like sexual shame and sometimes questions around sexual identity and you know, experiences of, I guess, to put a little trigger warning in here, we will be talking about, you know, sexual trauma.
Yeah.
But that is something that I do work on a lot with clients, and can be like a broad spectrum of trauma to do with like, you know, quite intense, severe experiences, and then also like really nuanced, complex experiences where some people didn't realize that that's what they were dealing with. And so it can be quite confronting, but it is also like, I guess, just a really beautiful opportunity for me and for the client, because, you know, these aren't conversations that we're having. It's not exactly something that your GP is going to open up with you, or like, you know, other, like sometimes even your psychologist won't want to talk, or like unconsciously might not be able to confront those topics with
100%.
you. And then, I do a lot of work on just like, normalizing topics around menstruation and sex and pleasure and things that are kind of a bit uncomfy, but I often get the feedback that it's really appreciated.
100%. It's so important.
And like, it's like what we were saying before we started recording. Some of the stuff we take for granted that is easy to grasp or common knowledge. And so sometimes I'll do a little post on Instagram just out of the blue because I'm feeling random and chaotic and inspired, and then people will message me being like, oh my god, like I really needed that today. So I think that's one thing we were talking about before, is that like I feel so lucky that I've grown up with a mum that's really like helped me feel open about talking about that stuff, like not have shame around that. And I think a lot of my friends were the same, and so I am very lucky. And also just the area we grew up, like we both grew up here in the Byron Shire, and it's like definitely a lot more open generally about topics like that. And so it's really shocking, like when I started even posting videos talking about sex and stuff, how many people were like, oh my god, I don't have anyone to talk to about this stuff, and are like so eager to know about this, but it's like still somehow so hard to, you know, get comfortable with those topics. So I think even like little things that you do make such a difference, and that's why I was like so excited to have you here, because I was like, it's just, it shouldn't be crazy to talk about this stuff, and yet it still is. And I think that's what creates so much of the shame and the trauma that people go through, is that they're like don't even have the vocabulary or knowledge of knowing what their experiences are and what's normal. And every time I talk to you, it's just so fun to like delve into it, because I've obviously like as a woman had my own experiences of like, you know, is this normal, blah blah blah, but then I can go to a lot of times my mum or my friends or like now you and stuff, and so many people don't have that. And I guess that's where your work is so important. I mean, it's so nice. Like I actually draw so much inspiration from my friends, because you know, it's often the conversations that I'm having with friends that inspire me to, you know, start talking more openly on like, you know, a public platform about something. But I guess it's also important to note that we don't have anywhere near the education that we should be having in schools. And like, I think there is a lot of shame around the ways in which these things can happen in our life and the way that these things can play out. But really, it's such a nuanced and complex conversation, because we're socialized in ways that, you know, play a part in that as well. So a lot of the time with clients, I end up working with like the people pleaser aspect, or like the inner child aspect, or like dealing with social pressures, cultural pressures. And I think it's been really eye-opening for me as a therapist and just a human to move out of the Byron Shire region and be like, wow, okay, so there's actually people out there dealing with things that I've never had to face in my personal life. And some of my friends, you know, we're not really talking about that either. And that's a lot to do with the culture that we grew up in here. So that's been really beautiful and rewarding as well, to actually broaden my own scope as a therapist and like my understanding of things, and take the time to educate myself on that as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you as well, because I feel like because sex is such a taboo thing and stuff, we don't often have the language to, and like the definitions of things as simple as like, what is your definition of sex? Because I think so many people have, I don't know, a very like old school penetration view of sex, and I would like your definition of sex if you'd feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I definitely think for me personally, my definition is, I guess, any exchange of intimacy, pleasure, like stimulation and erotic experience with another person or another people. And that's something that I really talk about a lot, is the penetration, like conversation, and how sex is more than just penetration, and it's also not always penetration. And like, you know, the definition between foreplay and sex and the gap that's there that I really try to bridge, because I don't see foreplay as, you know, the like, what do they call it, like the entree and then there's the dinner or like the dessert. Literally. And I just think that sex is all encompassing, and there's so many people out there that are having different types of sex that we don't, you know, like able-bodied, cisgendered, heteronormative culture is not talking about the different types of sex that are actually, you know, being had, and also that are really expansive and fun and beautiful. And I think when I started realizing this in my like kind of, you know, early 20s, when I first started talking about sex more and talking about menstruation and like just learning the way that I wanted to be having sex in my own personal life, it was so freeing, because I was like, oh my God, cool. You don't just have to have like penetrative sex with like, you know, someone who also is maybe limited in their expression. Yeah. And you're both just there like, I'm not actually sure how to expand outside of this, so this is just what we're doing. And I think that really comes down to the culture around sex and gender. And there's a lot of people who talk about like the gender expression and the gender affirming kind of practices that we do in sex, and how sometimes that can be quite like binary, and we really want to move away from that and just explore pleasure and like anything that gives you or your partner pleasure that's consensual and, you know, joyful. I think that's sex.
100%. And so much of it is just like reframing the way we think and stuff about it, and just being like, the goal is pleasure, you know, and not to come or finish, or I don't know, everyone has their own, but I feel like that's generally what we've been brought up thinking, is that like it's that way, which is so like not the truth or beneficial to anyone. To have a little transition, I wanted to ask you, because another big part of your job is art therapy, which I just think is so beautiful and important. As a person that has been brought up to really like nurture their creativity, I've always like done drawing and stuff, and I can see how much that has helped my mental health, but I think so many people aren't aware of that. And I just wanted to know, like, what was your experience of figuring out how beneficial creativity and art can be in understanding ourselves and working through issues, and also like how does it connect to your other side of work of like sex and stuff, because I feel like there is such a connection between like play, creativity, sex and art, and big question. Big question, but a great one again. Well, for me, I guess, you know, growing up in Mullumbimby, going to Steiner, art was always like a huge part of my world and education and my, I guess, the way that I express myself. But also I was a very like quiet, introverted kid, and I would spend a lot of time just in my room, like hours doing art. Like my parents would come in and be like, we've been looking for you. I'd be like, collaging. I've been here this whole time, like chill. So yeah, I was a very like, I guess
contemplative child, and I spent a lot of time just like observing the world. And when I entered into like my later high school years, I was dealing with a bit of like chronic health issues that made it really hard for me to engage with my peers. And that's when art just became like, you know, my savior. And like it was that opportunity for me to actually work through what I was dealing with in a really tangible way. And yeah, I didn't have a lot of mobility in my body, and I wasn't able to like get up and move around and like see friends and that kind of thing. So I really relied on that heavily as like just a channel for all of the emotion that I was dealing with. And then when I started studying, I was so confused, because I knew this part of me had a real curiosity about like human psychology and sociology, and I was like, oh, maybe I should like go and do a psych degree, but that felt a little bit like
not right.
Yeah, off for me. So then I was like, well, maybe I should do arts, and that's kind of how I ended up in like fashion and textiles. And then I was like, oh my god, art therapy, like you can combine them. So I ended up finding this like incredible modality that transcends the cerebral realm. Like it transcends that cognitive realm of talk therapy. And you know, when you look at the human experience and how like the subtle body of emotion and trauma and just like, you know, the complex experiences that we have in our lives, sometimes talking about that can be really challenging. And it's been such a profound tool in sexology, because, you know, the most stigmatized things are really hard to talk about face on with a therapist. And I always found that when I was like, you know, in therapy, and I'd be sitting across the room from someone and they'd be like asking me questions, and I'd just be like so confronted and uncomfortable and not entirely sure how to articulate my experience. So especially with kids and teenagers, but also adults, like I run an art therapy group every fortnight, and there's a core group that come on every single session, because they're just like, you know, this is my mindfulness practice. This is my hour and 15 minutes that I allocate for myself to express myself and connect to myself. And then there's also people that I use art therapy with in sexology sessions, and it's a way for us to, I guess, like access that unconscious material that isn't always on the, you know, periphery, easy to discuss and talk about. It's quite deep and it's a bit harder to get to. And like you said, it is a mindfulness practice at the end of the day. Like it's, you know, it's very, it's more than that. It's very rich, but there's a lot of people who didn't go to Steiner, who don't have like a creative practice and don't know how to sit down and do something artistic. So yeah, I think it's also giving people the opportunity for that. But then in saying that, I always try and encourage people to forget everything they know about art, so that they can just sit and be like present with their expressive kind of flow, instead of getting caught up in like the artist in them, which wants everything to be aesthetic and perfect.
I think that's such a big thing for me, is that I am such a perfectionist, and I've always done a lot of drawing throughout my life, like when I was younger and in school, like I said, but you know, that's not the thing that I'm necessarily good at. And I think it took me a lot of like different experiences and like realizing how beneficial it is for me to like be like, Joy, you have to let the perfectionism go. Like your drawings aren't going to be like incredible, but that's not the point. I think I had recently, like a few months ago, I was just having a really rough start to the beginning of the year, just like so confused. And I'm usually very good at like understanding my feelings, being like, okay, this is how I feel, this is why. I do a lot of journaling as well, which like really helps me with that. But at the beginning of the year, I just was like, I feel 12 billion things at once. I don't even know how to journal this. And so I actually drew something, which was very inspired by a lot of your Instagram posts where you like show like just simple things of like drawing how you feel and stuff. And so I kind of did this thing where I tried to draw out all of the emotions I was feeling, and it was amazing. Like it was like, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but I had so much fun, and it really allowed me to let go of the ego I think I have in that. And even that was a healing thing of like coming back to the present and being like, Joy, what actually matters? And it's so much of the time just that like love and presence and creativity that doesn't have an end goal. And so I thought that was really healing. When was like, did you have a time in your life where it really clicked for you that you were like, I need to do this as for me? Or was that through your studies, like you said?
I think it might have been when I was like doing my year 12 art major. And yeah, I was doing school part-time online because I couldn't go to school, and I had this like really neurotic art teacher and he was just such a king. Like he was such an icon. Like he would wear the most powerful outfits. And his name was Neil. Shout out Neil. And yeah, he was just like, I don't know, I went to a school with a lot of, you know, teenagers and adolescents that were kind of like on the edge because either they also couldn't handle going to normal schools because they had stuff going on, or they were just like, you know, the ones that needed a bit of extra support. And so he was kind of used to kids that just like really relied on like a bit of extra guidance. And yeah, I was just doing my art major and I tried to find a way to with like his guidance, it was all about like, you know, it was very conceptual as visual arts is, and it was kind of a form of art therapy for me. And I'd never done art therapy before, but I drew this this like self-portrait, and it was really healing, and it was like a huge canvas, and I had it in my bedroom while I was like doing the major. And so like it was kind of like staring me down, and we would have like dialogues and stuff. Like it was really cool and a bit psychedelic. And and then I think after that I just kind of, that like solidified it for me that I wanted to pursue like the arts and creativity in my work in some way and in my life.
And I feel like so much of the time, like growing up, you just see people as they get older let go of so much of the play that we so desperately need. And I think that was something that I even had to figure out with myself is, you know, like when you're younger, you have all this imagination, you're playing all the games, blah, 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 and you get older, and if you don't nurture that, we can almost feel a bit of like shame and be like, like kind of push down the inner child. And I really wanted to know, like, how has that experience with working with clients and like adults and like shown them how important that side of them is? Like, how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, it's honestly like, it's such a big piece, and it starts with me. Like as a therapist, you have to be able to hold your own big emotions. You have to be able to strip back your own ego. You have to be present. Like being present is so hard 100%. In life. Like I remember one of my lecturers at uni said, she's like a Buddhist psychotherapist, so presence is her thing. And she said that. She was like, you know, you can think of all the micro skills and all the like techniques, but as long as you show up and you be present with that person for that hour, then you're doing your job. Like everything else is a bonus. And it can be really challenging because I feel, you know, there's moments in sessions where I'll feel something come up in me, especially if they're resisting, because, you know, it's a very attuned experience. And sometimes I suggest things and it just doesn't fly. And then I'm very cautious and I take my time. Like, you know, I'll be seeing someone for like 4 weeks maybe before I suggest a more playful practice. But yeah, especially with the art therapy stuff, there's often like, you know, I'll give cues and I'll give guidance, and people will sometimes come back to me and be like, I don't get that one. And I'm like, okay, like let's unpack it together. Like, what don't you get about it? And yeah, it's constantly challenging me to like remember that I drop into that play state so quickly because I do these art therapy practices with myself. But also there's not a lot of areas in life where we can play.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of opportunities where adults get to be like children.
Yeah.
And for it to be celebrated. And that's something that comes into my work as a sexologist a lot, is like a lot of the questions people ask me, I'm like, especially with relationship stuff, I'm like, why don't you just play? Like, you know, explore, try new things, be silly, be clumsy, like go out on a date and run around. Like there's little things that often seem quite complicated when like, you know, we're coming up with solutions together, but usually it just comes down to that element of play and like connecting to your like childlike innocence in situations.
And I feel like play is so vulnerable as well. Like you don't think it is, but if I look at even like my closest friendships, I think they're the ones that I can be the most silly and playful with, because I feel safe enough and open to be vulnerable. Because it is just like being your silly childlike can feel like so scary. But do you feel like also, this is just my own question, but do you feel like a lot of adults that you see use sex as their only outlet for play?
Yeah, I mean, it's our one opportunity where we kind of strip everything back, and I think it's a place where people are actually affirming a lot of parts of themselves that they're not entirely aware of. And I think it can be really beautiful, but it also has a darker side to it, because you just have to go into that practice with consent and with awareness. And as long as like both parties or everyone involved is kind of present to that and, you know, aware of that, then it can be really safe and beautiful. But I think that kind of leads us into another conversation, because there's so much that people express during sex that they wouldn't express in their everyday life, which is where it's kind of
becomes a reliance on that as an outlet.
It can be like that. It can be and then it can just be purely beautiful and playful and silly, and I think that's where the safety piece comes in. And that's also something that can be quite an inhibitor, because people won't like actually let go. And a lot of the time, if, you know, people come to me and they're like, oh, I don't feel like I can't orgasm with a partner, or I don't feel present, I'm always in my head, or, you know, my body's always really tense and, you know, things aren't working, like whatever it is, it's usually because they're actually resisting that, you know, that vulnerable space of play and of expression. Because a lot of us aren't even okay with our full sexual expression on our own. So that is when I often say to people, okay, we'll go home and like, you know, be with yourself and see how that goes and meet yourself before you can share that part of yourself with someone else. No matter how long they're into their sexual journey, can still be something that they haven't explored.
I mean, I guess we're also always like growing and evolving, and so does our sexuality, so it's like there's never really an end to knowing. And so beautiful. So I think it might be time to delve into the questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
I wrote some down. So the first question I had a lot of people kind of ask is, do you believe sex is an energy exchange between individuals? This is kind of like your take.
This is a very personal question. Which I do personally believe it's an energy exchange.
Yeah, me too.
I was thinking about this one on the plane. I think it's every interaction we have is an energy exchange. And it kind of ties into what I was saying before about awareness. And it can be an exchange regardless of the type of sex that you're having. And I think that can be quite overwhelming for people. Like, you know, if they're having casual sex, or if they're having like a one night stand, or if they're non-monogamous and they're having sex with lots of different people, it can be quite confronting to think about the energy that's going into that. But really it's just about, for me personally, I think approaching every encounter with awareness and with respect and mutual respect, and, you know, acknowledging what it is that you're getting out of this experience, what it is that you're bringing to this experience, whether that's purely physical, intimate, pleasure oriented, or whether it's, you know, something more emotional, something more committed, something that's like serving a purpose for you and for the partner or the partners, or whether it's just like, you know, you're in a long-term relationship and it's an exchange of being committed to each other in a sexual dynamic. And I think it just comes down to self-inquiry and looking into what it is that you're what motivates you to be intimate with someone, what like prompts you to seek sex with another person, where that's coming from, and just be candid with that person. Like if you're, you know, a lot of the time, you know, we grew up watching rom-coms where stereotypically girls are getting kind of like, can I swear on?
Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about like coming, but I can't say fuck. Girls are like getting fucked over by the guy because he just wants something physical and she wants something emotional. And I think there's so many moments in life where we could prevent a lot of hurt from happening if we just go back in time and communicate about our intentions and have a bit of accountability. That's a big one in this. I think in every exchange you have with people, it's an energy exchange, and you need to be accountable for that. For the energy that you bring and the energy that you hold on to. Like it's not yours to carry, it's someone else's. So
100%.
But then in saying that, there's a lot of encounters that people have that aren't safe and that leave them with really awful experiences. So I think that's where it comes to that self-inquiry and like doing that work on yourself to heal and reconcile with what experiences you've had.
100%. Great answer. All right, next question. How to deal with low libido / sex drive. We had so many of these, and it was all women.
Really? Yeah. Okay. It's so funny because people really don't like what I have to say about this one. I was on another podcast, and I feel like the energy behind the question was like, is there like a supplement or like a trick? Like what's your like strategy? And okay, so what I have to say, I talk about this a lot. Basically, in my opinion and in my experience, if your body isn't wanting sex, then there's a reason. And you actually have to get in touch with that part of you and ask why it doesn't want to have sex. If your body doesn't want to be having sex, you're not going to have a sex drive, and something else might go out of balance. If you're still having sex, then I don't know, you might start getting thrush or a UTI, or you might just, you know, your body's going to tell you, like it communicates.
It's pretty clear.
It's trying to get us to listen. So I think my advice here is always pretty much the same, which is listen to your body, find the piece that's needing to be seen and needing to be heard, and really inquire about your intentions and whether you want to be having sex for yourself or for another. Have a look at your beliefs and your constructs around your sexuality. What are the reasons that you think you're having sex? Are you having the right type of sex for you? Do you enjoy sex? Do you feel safe? Do you feel safe with the person that you're wanting to have sex with, or with the people? And then there's also just the basics, like look at your overall health, your spiritual health, your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health. Like, are you hydrated? Are you like eating? Are you nourishing your body? Are you moving, like exercising enough? Do you have that, like, you know, in a lot of Eastern cultures and Eastern practices of medicine, they see our libido or our libidinous energy as our life force energy. So I guess when there's a loss of libido, it's kind of a really helpful sign from the body that something's out of balance.
Yeah.
So it can actually be like a catalyst, which can be really great. To inquire about what it is in your health that needs that attention, and whether that's just that you're not feeling appreciated or you're not feeling valued. You need to communicate your needs, your boundaries, express yourself. And then at the end of the day, you need to trust that your body is your biggest, conduit in life. And it's obviously something's moving through it, and you need to kind of honor that this is just a fluctuation, whatever that may be.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's like how you said, it's like such a big thing is also wanting to please other people, like wanting to have sex more for their partner or someone rather than for themselves. And I think it's also, as much as a lower libido can indicate something, it can also be that you're just not in the mood or don't need sex in the same way that someone else does. And I think that's also okay to communicate that and be like, I'm not 100% sure why, but I'm not, and that's also for someone that's receiving that. It can feel like a rejection, but that's not always the case at all. Like we live in such a world that's like, so like we should all be having sex all the time, blah, blah, blah. But it's like not always, like everyone is so different, and trusting that, I guess.
Yeah. And I think especially for, female bodied people, I've kind of seen this, we've all seen this evolution of sex being really, for women being really oppressed sexually. And so then when like the sexual kind of empowerment movement rose, there was all of a sudden this flip, and it was like, okay, now we all have to be having heaps of sex. And it just ties into what you said, like there's mixed match desire in relationship, and that is actually probably one of the number one reasons why couples seek sex therapy or that kind of thing. And I don't know if there's a question in there on like couples with this, coming up for them, but I just want to say, if this is something that you're experiencing in your relationship, then you need to find ways to be intimate with each other that isn't sexual. 100%. Like you need to communicate to each other what is it that you're craving? Is it actually the sex, or is it just the intimacy and the affection? Could we like give each other a full body massage, or have a bath together, or just like kiss and cuddle? Even like an eye contact moment in like public settings, like it's always just can be the littlest things that can bring that thing that we're craving so badly, I guess. And it's like you said, like my mom is a couple therapist as well, and I remember finding out, she telling me that like one of the biggest things couple come struggling is just that thing of like one person wanting more sex than the other. And it's really tricky because you can love that person, want to be with them, but then there's this different need, and figuring out what that is and communicating that is such a big part of... It's so vulnerable. Yeah. It's even vulnerable for people to admit that they want to be having more sex. Yeah. And it's vulnerable to admit that they want to be having less sex. Yeah. And it's not, it's not like something that our culture is very familiar with, because we have this, very linear view that sex is like penetrative and that it's this whole thing. But sex can be, you can literally just like kiss and be intimate and loving and affectionate, and then like all of a sudden you're like, oh cool, I'm done. I feel really good now. Yeah. Like it doesn't have to be the whole thing. And we like, let's be real, we live like crazy lives. We have such busy schedules. A lot of couples are dealing with kids, full-time work, like stresses, financial stuff. Sometimes you don't have a lot of privacy to like have sex. I think it's really important to actually not look at like, well, this also comes down to like less goal-oriented sex. Like if you have 5 minutes together in the shower, like maybe that's when you've got an opportunity to be intimate. Take those 5 minutes and like relish in it. And also, like, it comes back to that playfulness thing. And if we look at sex and like sexual energy as life force energy and creative energy, then do something together that's creative and fun and playful, or even on your own to kind of try and like reignite that flame.
Yeah.
And then see where you go. Remove the pressure. Just like
100%.
experiment and see how it unfolds.
Yeah, that's definitely how the best sex that I've had has come from that place. And I would say the same when I talk to so many of my friends. It's that just that playful, honest, vulnerable place that isn't goal oriented and just like about connection and pleasure. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, we love it.
We love it.
When you have like, I'm just gonna have a little sip of water. It's funny because it's when you've got like the time and you're like, oh, let's just like see where we go.
Yeah.
And that sometimes will, when you don't even commit to the full Monty, when you're like not even envisioning an end goal, that's sometimes when you actually get to the most like beautiful place.
Yeah. And not to say that orgasming at all is the goal, but talking to so many female bodied friends, a lot of the times that's when they do orgasm, is when it comes from that place of like not expecting it, just going with what feels right in that moment. And then, you know, it's not when you're trying so hard.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah,
I think there was a question on there about stress, and it's funny because like if you look at pressure, that's just a form of stress.
Yeah.
And stress is literally going to kill your libido. Like stress kills joy and pleasure. So obviously there's fun stress when it's like playful and, you know, when you're doing like role play or like BDSM or something or a bit of like kink or whatever it is, like that can be really fun and consensual and pleasurable. But when it's just straight up stressful stress, like that's not going to open up a body.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the orgasm piece comes in. It's like, it's funny because it's like such a paradox. You have to actually remove the intent for orgasm in order to get there.
100%. And it's like, it's so funny because so much of the time, you know, people are trying to make each other, especially like, you know, we all know female, a lot of time it's harder for a lot of female bodied people to orgasm. And so I feel like, especially in like heterosexual relationships, guys sometimes from a loving place so desperately want
really hard.
Yeah, like I have definitely experienced where like a guy from a loving place will be like, so want that for me or whatever, but then it's just that thing of like, it just adds the added pressure, you know. And it's sometimes so much better, what I've learned is just to come from that place of not expecting anything. All right, should we go to the next question? Okay. Why don't I feel like being intimate / kissing my partner? We've been together for a year.
This one I've got some thoughts on. I think it's hard because there's so many follow-up questions that I have. Of course. But there is this term, which I'm just going to throw in here, called limerence. Have you heard of limerence?
Is that... Tell me more.
So I'm going to probably butcher it. It's not something that I'm super well versed in, but it's basically this window in the relationship, which is kind of like the infatuation phase. So your mum has probably talked to you about it. It's kind of that like you're obsessed with each other. Everything they do is perfect and endearing. And like your sex is amazing. You're so turned on all the time. It usually can last from like 3 months to 18 months. And there's like a darker side to limerence, but it is something that a lot of couples experience in
the early
stages, and not everybody does. Some people like to say that it's kind of like based on like trauma or like attachment style. Like there's lots of different theories that inform it. But anyway, for the sake of this question, it is something that can come into play when you look at that 1 year mark. And all that happens when limerence fades is you kind of just reach your baseline of attraction and intimacy. Not that that's the new normal, but it's sort of more like you're coming down off of this high of like, you know, hormones and excitement and newness. And if you were in that limerence phase, then you're kind of coming down off of that. So it can sometimes just be the point in your relationship where you actually start to settle.
Yeah.
And maybe your nervous system is like, oh, cool. Like,
yeah,
this is, we're here to stay. I don't have to like, you know, my system doesn't have to be on high alert. I don't have to like push anything. It's just there. We're in love. It's this beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side of that, maybe there's, you know, when the limerence ends, or like when you're about a year into the relationship, that's when you can start to see sides of that person that you didn't know before.
Yeah.
Or it's when, you know, new insights can emerge. So maybe there's something you didn't realize going into the relationship that's kind of coming to light, or maybe your some of your patterning is sort of coming to the surface, or there's like little aspects that you didn't see before because you were just like in love and you're seeing them all of a sudden. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't get too like caught up on like, you know, those little things. But I mean, yeah, if you're not wanting to be intimate with your partner and it's a year into the relationship, then I would just take a moment to sit down with each other and check in, especially outside of the bedroom. Like take the pressure away, go out on a little like relationship kind of check-in date, and just like see where each other's at, see like the type of sex that you're having again, like what types of intimacy are there? Are you spending enough quality time together? Are you spending enough time alone? Are you nourishing your own interests and hobbies and spending time with your friends? Do you live together? Like, what are your schedules like? Like, there's so many questions I would ask. But yeah, look into the limerence thing and see if that resonates. And it definitely might not, which is fine. But I think it's really common.
It's so common. Like that when you asked me what it was, I didn't have those exact words, but I knew that it was that thing of like after the honeymoon, and usually it is around the 1 year mark that changes happen in the relationship. Like you've been together for a year and you start often seeing the person as the whole person and not just all the parts that you love about them, but also sometimes the little flaws that maybe you kind of like didn't really acknowledge at first or whatever, and learning to either choose to love that and work through that and deepen the relationship, which I think is so beautiful. Like there is so much, like you said, like amazing stuff that can happen after that stage. It's like, oh, this is the real stuff. But it can also be an indicator, that maybe some things need to be worked on, or maybe you're not even compatible anymore, you know?
I think it's also important to note that like a lot of the time your attraction to someone it can be based on them for sure, but sometimes a year into a relationship is when your own like patterns and, you know, maybe some of your own wounding or like attachments, or just like your little things that make up who you are as a person and as a partner based on your past experiences and your relationship with yourself, that can also start to play out. So maybe just inquiring like into where you're at.
100%. All right, next question. Someone asked, can you explain the science behind that beautiful feeling of connection after sex?
Yeah, I mean, to keep it simple, it's like a concoction of hormones are going on in that moment. Like there's oxytocin, which is the love hormone, which this is why I talk a lot about like different forms of intimacy, because oxytocin comes from physical touch, it comes from skin on skin, it comes from like mood lighting and candles and music, like anything that makes you feel like that bubbly love kind of feeling, that's gonna, you know, get the oxytocin flowing. Then you've also just done like some physical exertion, so there's, you know, what is it? I'm having a mind blank.
Oh my god, what gets released after exercise? Endorphins.
And then there's the dopamine hit of like pleasure and gratification and all of that. And then there's probably a few more. I think it's just like you've just been completely vulnerable. You've just stripped everything back. You've just gotten in touch with a part of yourself like we were talking before that you don't often get to explore and access. You've expressed maybe like a lot of people will find themselves like getting really emotional or crying or laughing or being silly or feeling happy for no reason. Like you're kind of tapping into things that I like to see sex as kind of like, you know, it's like a reset. Like if there's been any kind of stagnant energy, it's like doing like a big like exercise or like dancing or like, you know, running around the house listening to music, being silly. Like you're just kind of moving through like the stagnant energy, and like orgasm especially is like an expulsion of energy. So it's like, especially for female bodied people, orgasm is very energizing. So it's kind of I don't know if that's a super scientific answer, but
I think it is. That was good. No, 100%. Okay, last question.
Okay,
all right. I feel like you kind of answered this one, but is it normal to feel so emotional during sex?
Is it normal to feel emotional? Yeah. I mean, everything is normal.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing that's not normal when it comes to sex. I think it just depends on the type of sex that you're having and where you're at and what that sex represents to you. Like, is it with so many follow-up questions? Is it with someone that you're in love with? Is the emotional love like joy, happy emotions, or is it like sad, grieving emotions? Like there's a kind of there's a lot more there than just like a simple answer on a podcast. It's like, you know, are you feeling safe? Is that the only kind of moment in your life where you can let these emotions arise? And is that what that experience is offering to you? I think, you know, there's like, what's the antithesis of that? Like feeling apathy or feeling numbness, which is something that, you know, if that's what you were feeling, then I would inquire into that for sure. So if you're feeling really extreme heightened emotion, I would inquire into it and just like see what this represents for you. If you're asking this question, then maybe you're more curious about it than, you know, just maybe it doesn't feel normal to you. Maybe it is something you want to explore more. But like we just answered, you know, the other question, it's a very intimate act where a lot of hormones are flowing. You're naked most of the time. So you're quite raw and vulnerable and stripped back, and you can be in that pleasure state, which sometimes when you're in a state of pleasure, like anything can happen.
It's a release.
Just, like, who knows? Like you could say random things that you don't normally feel. You could make strange noises. You could suddenly want to like cry. Also, when you look at like the energetics of sex, like as like a female bodied person, if you have a cervix, your throat and your cervix have like a massive energy channel that travels through those two places. So I guess it's like, if there are emotions that are kind of repressed or blocked in your everyday life, or anything that you're not expressing through your, you know, expression throat, like your expression throat, through that part of your body, which is like where we express our feelings, then maybe sex is like a place where you can actually tap into that and express things and feel things and access things that you can't in everyday life. It's kind of hard to just answer, like,
it's hard. Well, vague. I feel like a lot of these questions, the answer that you can give them is just, okay, well, ask yourself all of these other questions.
Exactly.
Because so much of it is just tuning into yourself and your experience, and so it is so personal. So I think, like you said, you have so many other questions to ask, but like you said, some questions that I think are really relevant and can really help guide you know, anyone going through that into a bit more clarity. And
I guess just like touching on what I said about like the I guess, opening up the emotional channel.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's just, we hold a lot of tension in our body and we hold a lot of emotion in our body, and especially in the parts of our body that involve that like sex is involved in, like
100%.
usually in like your pelvis, and like if you have a womb, then in your womb space, like we hold cellular emotion. So it depends on what parts of the body are being stimulated. Like, yeah, sometimes when I get a massage, I cry.
Yeah.
I feel super emotional. I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Oh my God, amazing.
Amazing.
So the last question I've been asking all my guests is just, in this part of your life right now, do you feel like you need to work more on your ego and like sense of self, self-worth, self-love, or more on the humility side of yourself?
That's a great question. I think at the moment I would probably say the ego, because like imposter syndrome is real.
Yeah.
And it's funny, the older I get and the more life experience I get under my belt, the more I realize like how little belief I have in myself and like my self-worth. And I think starting your own business, especially as like a sexologist, psychotherapist, like I didn't go down the route of like joining a clinic with a multidisciplinary team and getting that support and marketing and, you know, promotion. I'm doing all of that on my own, and the work that I do with clients, I'm a human. I obviously am still confronted by my own stuff. So I think I would just love to have so much belief in myself and to have like a really fucking fortified self-worth.
Don't we all?
So I think I'm probably too humble sometimes, to be honest. Like,
I would say so.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of my, like, I'm still working on like the people pleaser in me.
Yeah.
I think I just want to be an unapologetic, authentic expression of Edie.
100%. And you're killing it. I'm so like in awe of all the things you post, and every time we have a conversation, like you're doing such amazing work in the world, and you deserve your title and everything. Like, you're amazing. Thank you. And for anyone that's listening, please follow Edie if you're interested in anything we've talked about. If you have any more questions, what's your at?
It's with.edie, so EDIE. I post little videos, like art therapy videos, and random little inspired rants about sex and pleasure.
And you're Melbourne based at the moment, so if you guys ever want to book in with anything.
Well, I'm actually online. I don't have a clinic space. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that's even better for anyone that wants to get in contact with you. Would you say just on Instagram is the best way?
Yeah, so just head to my Instagram. I'll have a website very soon.
Exciting.
Maybe by the time this comes up, I'll have a website.
Yeah.
But
if so, I'll link it down below in the
in
description or whatever.
I'm pretty accessible. Just find me.
Just find the girl.
Like, send me an owl.
No, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Having me.
It's been so nice.
Yeah, it's been great.
I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys got something out of it. I actually like had a matcha this morning, and for some reason it's like this new matcha powder. It's making me so shaky. So I was like very like energized.
Yeah, I was like, I always get so, something comes over me. Like when I talk about this stuff, I just get so alive and energetic. You know,
so hope you guys got all the good vibes. And
I hope you got some wisdom out of my
100%.
like ranting.
Yeah, and if you guys need or want, not need, if you guys want us to do another episode and answer more questions, we always can.
Yeah,
I love talking to you, so let us know, comment, leave a review, and I love you guys. Love you, Edie.
Love you. Thank you for having me.
All right, bye guys.
Bye.